This Week in Virology, the podcast about viruses, the kind that make you sick. From Microbe TV, this is TWiV, This Week in Virology, episode 929, recorded on August 19th, 2022. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you're listening to the podcast all about viruses. Joining me today right here at the incubator in New York, Alan Dove.
Good to be here. And it's, hi.
Hey,
hi,
Alan.
Yes, I can wave into Vincent's camera over here. So it's a beautiful sunny day, about 89 degrees here in New York City. And other than walking into the wrong building at first and finding the wrong 7th floor, I found the place just fine in the lovely incubator here.
Yeah, well, after we're done, I'll give you a little tour.
Yeah.
Also joining us today from Fort Lee, New Jersey, Dixon Despommier.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back. And Alan, do you find the incubator a little warmer than outside?
No, actually, it's cooler. It's so this is the incubator for cold-adapted mutants, which I appreciate.
Okay, for psychrophiles, I got it. And
also joining us
Jersey,
from
the weather. Wait a minute. The
I
weather
don't care
here
about
is
the
different.
weather.
It's okay. Fine. Next.
Also joining us from Madison, New Jersey, Brianne Barker.
Hi, great to be here. I have a feeling my weather is somewhat similar to Dixon's weather in being 90 degrees and sunny.
It is.
And from Ann Arbor, Michigan, Kathy Spindler.
Hi, everybody. Here it's 82 Fahrenheit, 28 Celsius. Yay!
Hey, you're perfect.
Yes.
You're perfect
Yes.
numbers.
Perfect numbers.
Very good.
And it's partly cloudy, white, puffy Springfield clouds. Nice.
So we have a guest for you today. He is from the podcast In the Bubble. He's the author of Preventable. Andy Slavitt, welcome to TWiV.
It's good to be here on show number 929.
Yeah, we've been doing this since 2008, and our numbers sort of increased during the pandemic, as you might guess, for a virology podcast.
You had a spike.
We did, yes.
did have a spike. And we thought
It's
it would
okay,
be,
we absorbed it.
We thought it would be interesting. Usually we have virologists on this show, but we thought someone like you who, in the room and during the discussions would be interesting to have your perspective as you presented in Preventable. So welcome to our podcast.
But since you have a lot of non-virologists that listen, I could probably relate to the audience better than you all can.
Yes, that is perfect. At least it's a lot of the
Andy,
audience.
Can you show us what's on your T-shirt first before we go any further? You have something written across your T-shirts. I love it. I love
Friend
it.
of the
I love
pod.
the pod.
Yeah,
Good.
it's a competitive, nasty group of people that make a podcast.
Yeah.
So they're good. They're good
The
friends.
cutthroat world.
Yeah, it's a cutthroat world of podcasts where I think everybody has one now. So
This is true.
Yeah, but this
T-shirts.
nobody has a virology podcast, so we basically picked one that nobody else could do, and
I think for the last 20 years, 15 years, that was true. I don't know if that's true anymore. Plus, everybody's a virologist and everybody's an epidemiologist. So,
That's right.
Right.
We've democratized knowledge completely.
So, what do you call yourself, Andy?
I'm kind of a trouble guy. I come in to when things are in trouble. I try to help when there's things in trouble. And when things are not in trouble, I try to cause trouble.
Okay.
Your Wikipedia page actually says that.
Does it?
Yes.
Again, anybody could write on my Wikipedia page. So,
That's right.
you've got this democratization of who we all are.
Yeah. So give us a little sense of your background, Andy. What kind of education and training do you have?
Very good.
The worst kind. I went to Penn as an undergrad. I went to Harvard for the highly refined science called an MBA. I have then spent most of my career in the private sector in healthcare, building organizations, leading organizations, starting organizations. And then I made quite a turn in 2013 you all remember it's seared into people's memory of when healthcare.gov launched and crashed. I did something that I bet most people listening would say is crazy, and that I called the White House and asked if they needed help. That led me on a journey to being the person who led the turnaround of the ACA, ultimately led me to run the ACA when President Obama asked me to run Medicare and Medicaid, led me to fight to defend the ACA, become a bit of an advocate. When I left, and then I spend my time, in addition to my podcast, do a lot of work investing in underserved communities to focus on health equity. Did a stint in the Biden administration as the COVID senior advisor to help get the vaccine situation turned around. Again, you see bits of me finding trouble, causing trouble, and helping with trouble. A little bit of all of it.
What types of things did you do with the Obamacare website?
Prayed a lot. This was truly broken in every sense of the word. And, it was interesting because I called. Look, if you call the White House and said, hey, do you need help? 99% chance you're going to hear no, or they're not going to return your call. But here's the thing. When you're the only one that calls in the country, you get a different reaction. And so I called on a Tuesday. On Friday, they held a press conference and they announced the good news that I was going to lead the turnaround. And then at the end of that, they said, and it will be fixed within 5 weeks. I had not seen the code. I'm not a technologist. I hadn't seen the hardware. I didn't know anything. I just asked if they needed help behind the scenes, kind of.
Mm-hmm. So they held a press conference and said, good news, we found a sucker.
I learned how Washington worked. That was not the first or the last time that I walked into those kinds of situations. But it is. But I also learned, you got to go give people confidence. You got to go be accountable. You got to go execute. You got to go do all that stuff. And so that became, it changed my life. Right? It was a fascinating experience, and thankfully, after a short amount of time, we had millions and millions of people getting insurance for the first time in their lives, and it was. Yeah. I thought it was a story of how government can work after it fails, Absolutely. Which is constantly the story of.
You heard that great interview that they had sometime shortly after this, where they said, "Are you in favor of Obamacare or the Affordable Health Care Act?" And of course, we hate Obamacare, but we love the Affordable Health Care Act. Well, that just shows you the level of stupidity that you have to deal with.
It shows you a lot of things, but one of the things it shows you from a government perspective is you pass legislation, it does good things, you believe it does good things, you know it helps people, and then you go right to implementing it. You skip something very important. And it's a lesson right now in the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is this prescription drug legislation. The pharmaceutical industry will spend hundreds of millions of dollars, literally hundreds of millions of dollars,
trying to avoid it.
Defining this in the public's mind as the worst thing in the world. It'll end innovation. It'll end our ability to care for ourselves. And so the administration has to help define what we're doing and what this means in the eyes of the public. And with the ACA, they didn't do that. President Obama, who is a great communicator, did not say what we then learned a few years later, which is this is about pre-existing conditions and never being discriminated against ever again. 90% of the public believes in that. They just never told people that it's what about. So you're exactly right. When they said, what do you think of Obamacare? People said, I hate it because I've only been told bad things about it.
That's right.
So you write in your book, Andy, many Americans get a raw deal with health care. And so can that be fixed, or are we doomed to be with that forever?
We're doomed unless we change it. And this is what I mean by causing trouble. There's a lot of people very satisfied with that situation. There's a lot of people who don't love it, but they're certainly not going to risk what they have in order to change it. And those are two different categories, but both of them are things that you have to fight against. You know, you live 10 to 15 years younger now if you are born into a certain zip code, have a certain color of your skin, have a certain income level. Literally miles away, 5, 7, 8 miles away, you have these amazing disparities. And it's everything from maternal health to child health to mental health to cardio health to cancer. And it ain't about virology. It ain't about epidemiology. It ain't about science. It's about not really care. It's about empathyology. It's about not caring about people who lead different and more complicated lives. It's not about understanding the effect of poverty and racism and a bunch of other things on a healthcare system that kind of works okay for those of us who are willing to be proactive. If my wife is sick, I'm going to make 10 phone calls, take off work, find the best physician, do what I can, sit in the waiting room, park the car, whatever it needs, and she'll eventually get good care. And maybe we'll be frustrated, but it'll work out. Not so for about 130 million people. For about 130 million people, that is not a care experience that they can give themselves.
Well, and it's interesting you say that's not about virology, but then a pandemic comes along and it is about virology. It's right. I mean, those are the systems that we needed to be talking about before the pandemic.
If
right?
You're a virologist, it's always about virology.
It is always about virology. Yes.
You
Welcome to TWiV.
Point. You make a great point, and here is the amazing insight from the pandemic: is you could see our issues in real time, like if you don't go get your blood pressure taken for 10 years or 5 years, like that is a public health crisis that none of us can see. And when you eventually stroke out at some point in time, nobody will have thought about what we couldn't do. So the consequences of our actions are so delayed as to not, unless we're doing some longitudinal study of Framingham and looking back and blah, blah, blah. But the amazing thing about the pandemic was it gave us a gift of like, you touch the hot stove, you're going to burn your finger. Okay. Oh, well, we better not touch that. Oh, man, there's a whole bunch of people that have been touching that hot stove now, and we kind of now are all seeing it. And you can't avoid it. You can't ignore it. You can put your head in the sand. You can do a lot of things, but it is out there. It is out there for us to react to. And how we choose to react to it, that is on us. That's the empathyology that we got to deal with.
The way to couch this in is another way is that everybody in this country knows somebody who died from COVID-19. During World War II, it was about 1 in 10 that knew someone who died from the war. There's a huge difference here. And we didn't even react to it like it was a war, but it truly was. And it was a war of, well, like you said, it's a war of inequalities and providing enough health care for everybody. So has any of that changed since we realized the only way to stop this goddamn thing is to have everybody on board, not just a few people, but everybody?
I think we now all realize what total assholes we are. Like, that's changed. Like, I think we all could say beforehand, I mean, there was this moment where it was like, what can I do to help? As long as it's constrained to banging pots and pans and sewing masks, I'm in.
I remember that.
And so what then happened is somebody then said, hey, wait a minute. You know what? It's really only old people, overweight people, working people who work by the hour that are at risk.
That's right.
And so you're like, wait a minute. Why am I screwing up my life? I mean, I thought, I'm not saying people don't care. But there's a question about caring versus caring enough to sacrifice the things that are important to you. And I don't mean to mock it, because like, if you started a business 10 years ago and it was your life's dream, a family restaurant, and it closed during the pandemic and you lost your business, that is real loss. That is real suffering. We shouldn't diminish it. if you have a year of a kid with a special need who for a year couldn't go to school,
Right.
that is real loss. If you're a woman who had to take care of your family and couldn't get promoted in your job because you had to step back, that is real loss. And so there are all kinds of losses from this pandemic besides just knowing someone who died, dying, being sick. And we have to get good at acknowledging each other's suffering. That too is a part of the empathyology, right? It's not just like my kind of pain. It's that there's lots of different pain.
The problem is that you have to treat everybody equally, and that's very difficult to get in terms of the way people grow up and are taught and behave. And we live in a bubble. You talk about a bubble. Academicians live in a bubble. You rarely see this kind of behavior among the student body of most schools that are worth going to. At least that's my opinion. But it's there. I know it's there. But how do you get everybody to vote the same way on this? That's the problem. How do you get them to vote the same way on this?
I think we might even have to take a step further back and say, let's start with not being quite as judgmental about one another. Let's start with not rolling our eyes when someone wears a mask or rolling their eyes when someone doesn't wear a mask. Let's start with just respecting that people come from different places.
Exactly.
Legitimately so. And for someone to, look, I was partly for a while in charge of communicating with people about vaccines and getting vaccinated. And the thing that people forget in Washington, they forget it everywhere, is that communication isn't like, what are my sound bites, what am I talking about? Communication begins with listening to where people are and what they have to say. And when someone says, hey, this vaccine is new, how do I know what the long-term effects are?
Right.
That's got to be treated like a legitimate question.
It is.
You're not a moron to ask that question. Now, I'm more interested in the mistakes we made than in calling other people stupid. So we made mistakes in how we explained the vaccine to people when it first came. We said, this is 96% effective. We said, if you take this vaccine, you're not going to get COVID. We said a lot of things that turned out not to be the case. And we, as scientists, I'm not a scientist, but I'll lump myself in, then said, well, how could we have known at the time? Things changed. We just said the best we knew at the time. You know what that sounds like? An excuse. It sounds like an excuse. It doesn't sound like leveling with people. It doesn't sound like building trust. It sounds like something my kids would tell me when they chose to do something social instead of go to school and go to class and got a bad grade and said, but Dad, I thought at the time that I could do this. And I'm like, yep, I'm sure you did. I'm sure you did. I'm sure you didn't want to get a B or whatever you got. I'm sure you wanted to get an A. But the truth is the public looks at our folks, at your profession, at other scientific professions, and says, yeah, I don't trust you because you look down on us. You don't admit your mistakes. You don't tell us the truth. You don't listen to us. And you call us anti-science when we have any questions.
Now at the same time, okay, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I can go on and on about anti-science people and all that. It's easy to do. We've all done it. It's easy to do. And it's more convincing than what I just said. Believe me, it's more convincing. But this has to be said too.
Sure. But at the same time, you'd have to agree that these were nuances that were not easily explained in our current media landscape. And speaking as a co-host of a show where we tried to explain these nuances, okay, it's 96% effective against bad symptomatic COVID-19 is what the trials found. And we discussed this ad nauseum on back episodes of TWiV. That is not the message that came through to the millions.
Alan, are you implying that more people listen to 30-second sound bites than 2-hour podcasts?
I have reluctantly come to the conclusion that might be the case, yes. There's a barrier there to get over, that a large part of the reason for the misunderstanding was that the channels that are available that most people are getting are just not communicating the nuances that then become apparent when somebody gets the vaccine and then tests positive for SARS-CoV-2 and says, hey, I got vaccinated and I still got infected. What? You lied. No, you didn't get real sick, did you?
I'll tell you what. I'll go back. You send me that episode. You text me that episode, and I'll listen to it. Okay. And I'll judge for myself whether I think you did what you just think you did, or whether you just think you did that.
It was actually a sequence of pretty much most of the pandemic. I think we were harping on these notions that the vaccine is not to prevent infection. It's not. We talked at length about what's called sterilizing immunity and how you're not getting it with this. But that is a concept that our listeners are perhaps well versed in because we harped on it. But I think it is a concept that was not easily communicated.
I'll tell you how even wonderful scientists I know, and you may be an exception, processed the news in November when we saw the first Moderna and Pfizer studies back in November of 2000, when we were all desperate for good news, when we were all hoping we get a vaccine soon, when we were all holding our breath for this trial. And when Pfizer came out and said 94%, people were cheering.
Yeah.
People said 94%. People, and what are the things that people started talking about at that point in time? If we vaccinate 70 to 80% of the public, we can have herd immunity.
That's right.
And you may be an exception. You may have said, we'll never have herd immunity. This is here forever. It's going to be endemic. Maybe you said that. But if you did, good for you.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, responsibly said things like, this is what we know right now, and it could change. But not a lot of people said, look out for the Greek alphabet, because we're going to have alpha. And we're going to be like, I will tell you, I had in the bubble over 100, 150 smart people, scientists, etc. Okay. You know how many of them said we're likely to get more severe variants or more contagious variants that evade immunity? You know how many people said that of all my guests?
None.
One.
Tony Fauci.
No, not Tony Fauci. One person said that, and that one person is not even a virologist or an epidemiologist. It was Bill Joy, who is a crazy pessimist, who everyone's like, this guy is like way deep and dark, and he was a voracious reader, and he was studying like all these kinds of things, and was like, everybody keeps saying there's herd immunity. Everybody keeps saying viruses get more mild over time, but children are a vector, and that's going to protect this from happening. And he's like, and he had all these theories. Maybe they were wrong, maybe they're right, but he said, I think we're going to end up with worse variants. Not one other person said that in my entire show. So play the tapes, listen to ourselves. But my point is, even if you did say it right, you then make another excellent point, which is it takes a long time to explain, and it's hard.
It does.
Yes. Right. And that's going to be the case even if we are responsible. So if we're hard, let's get good at it. We're doing other hard things, but this is something that's hard, and we're like, it's secondary. I think as a community of responsible scientific leaders, that it's important. And then go back and listen to all your podcasts and listen for the times where you said, hey, I was wrong about that. Listen for that.
We do that every time.
That comes up.
Yeah.
At least I do. I don't know about anybody else.
That's great. It's a great habit. It's a great habit.
Andy,
we also found out by our hubris, I guess, that if you go back in history and look at the introduction of any vaccine, there was a similar opposition to it. I mean, the polio vaccine was opposed. I guess yellow fever might have been also. There's a history of this and a disbelief until the truth will out. So there will always be a proportion of people that will raise their hand and say, this is my life. I want to do it my way. And my way says, don't you dare touch me. And some of those people survive long enough to actually say, look, I survived, see? So therefore you shouldn't take it either. And other people say, oh my God, the woman next to me just lost both of her children. She's got it. Her husband died from it. Don't you people know what to look for?
Right.
And the overcrowding of the OR and the ER and all these other places, it's just, a lot of people weren't looking too, right?
We're about to go through it now with the polio vaccine.
Absolutely.
Same argument.
You better
Kathy,
watch out, the guy.
Kathy, you were going to say something.
So, yeah, I wanted to know, Andy, in your healthcare policy journey, did you have some background in pandemic preparedness when this came along, or how did you get involved in the pandemic? How did that come about?
Okay, so now I know that having some experience is a prerequisite to doing something. But at the time, it was the fact that the Trump administration, and to me, they're not an abstract thing. I know them. I know the people. I know them very well. The Trump administration was doing nothing constructive for a long time. Well, they were doing one thing constructive. They were starting the vaccine research and funding the vaccine research and placing bets against 8 compounds. That's constructive. But what they were doing with the public was, largely speaking, destructive.
Right.
And I knew it, and many of them knew it and were hamstrung. Many of them knew it and just wanted to obey the president. One of them knew it, Nancy Messonnier, and tried to do something about it, and that ended her career effectively. And so I launched this thing called the #StayHome campaign, which got 100 million viewers in a matter of weeks. And I had 25 scientists. And we created some simple guidelines, and we just started doing things that the government wasn't doing. And I surround myself with experts so that I never have to call myself an expert. Occasionally, I will say I will get over the tips of my skis and say something that it will sound like it comes from something that I knew. Very rarely the case. So, as I said, in responding to trouble, I marshal resources. I do what needs to be done. I have a rare experience set that I've been in the government, I've been in the private sector, and I don't really, I've got this flaw, this psychological flaw that during the pandemic, I could not feel like a victim. I had to do something, and I had to constantly do something. That's what I wrote about in my book.
And we feel the same way. Obviously, that's why we do this.
Well,
so
sure.
I have a question for you.
But you have skills, and I don't. That's the difference. That's the question Kathy's asking is
probably.
Hey, how come unskilled guy is doing something? I get why you are doing something.
That's not the way I meant it. In fact, because I remember you said in your book that, in December 2019, you gave a speech for anniversary of a public health school thing in Minnesota. And so I know you have some background, and I just was wondering where it had been aiming, if it did have much in the way of pandemic preparedness or just other general public health things.
Really, no. I mean, I gave them effectively political advice. I gave this speech. It was the 100th anniversary of public health. I went and looked, and I'm like, you are the worst merchandisers. You have added years to our lives. You have yet you are the sleepy profession that nobody respects, and you whine because you don't get enough money. And when was the last time you went to Congress and made the case? And let me talk to you about how to make the case for real investment in this and real execution of this. And because fundamentally, at some point in time, there will be money available, and people need to know why it needs to go to public health. And here's where you need to execute, and this is where the resources need to be. I didn't realize, Mike Ostrom was sitting in the audience, neither one of us knew that at that very moment, December 2019, this was about to get real, life was about to change, and we were going to spend not the $100 billion, which I so boldly said that we needed, we were going to go spend trillions of dollars because we hadn't spent the $100 billion.
That's right. My question to you also is, how do you get the public to listen to the truth when the former President Trump catches COVID-19, his physicians say, no hydroxychloroquine for you, no ivermectin for you. You're going to get monoclonal antibodies, and you're going to get the vaccine. And he did. And then he comes back out and he doesn't say a word about it. He doesn't tell anybody, hey, by the way, what I was telling you before was bullshit. Here's what really works. He didn't say that at all. He allowed them to still believe that hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin were good substitutes for what he received. And that pisses me off royally because that means that nobody's listening. So how do you get them to listen when they're not listening?
So add to that we used to communicate linearly, right? Get on a newspaper, even a podcast, you can speak to multiple people. But in social media, you can communicate exponentially.
Tweet.
Through a tweet, through something slightly provocative that you know is going to travel. And when you can communicate, I mean, I don't know if you all read the book Sapiens.
Yep.
But right, it's this whole notion that like when our culture, when we could spread ideas to multiple people at once, it brought us out of the hunter-gatherer age,
that's right,
and into this age where we could bullshit each other and at scale. And now we can bullshit each other
at scale.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah, at exponential scale.
Hey, wait a minute, that's what I did for a living.
No, yours was a more artisanal approach, Dixon.
So your question is, how do you fight it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. How do you do that?
One answer is, and I think it's the wrong answer, but it's the one that you hear most constantly, is use the same tool to tell the right story, to spread the truth.
Fire. Yeah, well,
it doesn't work. It doesn't work. I can tell you,
that's right.
That was Facebook's response to me when I would call him out from the White House. Andy, do you know that for every lie that's on here, we tell 10 wonderful truths about the vaccine? And I said, here's what you know and you're not telling me. It's not just that you're telling a bad story about the vaccine. It's this. Because of the way your algorithms work, the 11% of the public that is deathly afraid of needles, those people very specifically, when they ask about the vaccine, see a giant ass needle.
Right.
And the people who are of childbearing years see a very targeted message about fertility. And so it can only be, you can have 100,000 good messages and 10,000 bad ones, but what you're so good at is giving the 10,000 messages to the 10,000 wrong people at exactly the wrong time. And that's, the 100,000 messages go into the ether. That's what social media and algorithms do. And we've seen them do it in the elections. We've seen them do it in.
They're still doing it.
100% they're still doing it. I mean, guess what? Because the exponential thing is also exponential money for them.
Yes.
So what did Trump have to gain by telling everybody that ivermectin and maybe you can inject alcohol or I forget. No, Clorox. Bleach. It was Clorox. What did he have to gain by lying? Nothing. Okay.
So I think that's the wrong question. That's the question we all ask. The framing, what does Trump gain from this, will not lead you to understanding, in my experience.
Well, what do you think the answer is then?
Now we're getting into the head and psychology of someone that that will be studied for decades.
He's certifiable. He is certifiable. There's no question about it.
I mean, look, he believes in his ability to think on his feet, get people to follow him, and he's constantly testing messages. Twitter for him, you would notice he will put something out there, even if it was insane, and go, "Oh, a lot of people thought this was great, so I'll use it in my speeches." I mean,
Exactly.
He's a finesse marketer. He's a totally and he also has like this a very significant number of people who believe anything said about negative about him and against him is more proof that people are just out to get him.
That's right.
So all of that falls on deaf ears, and he knows he's got this level of support where he can do no wrong. Now, you'd say, okay, and there's someone who is thinking strategically from a chess move, you go, okay, well, I'm going to take that base and go expand it further. This is where the guy is different. This is where the guy is like, no, I'm not doing that. I am not going to be liked by everybody. I'm going, my lane is controversy. My lane is chaos. My lane. And so when you then go to what does he have to gain from this ivermectin thing, like he's immune to like whether they like me, they don't like me, they're not. It's like, I'm going to go, I don't have to impress you as smart. I just have to be the guy that bucks everybody else. And the fact that the establishment says ivermectin doesn't work is enough for him to say, I like that lane. I like that lane. Doesn't matter whether it ends up being true or not. I can own that lane and buck these institutional establishments, everybody who looks down on me, everybody who, these people who are so much smarter than me in their own minds, they can't catch up with me.
So, okay, based on your experience with, preventing trouble, dealing with trouble, etc., this is not going to be our last pandemic. So what advice would you actually give if you were giving that talk again about what we should be doing going forward? How do we deal with this exponential information sharing? How do we deal with some of these issues?
I'm not going to embarrass anybody, but I'm on several task forces on the future of the pandemic, next pandemic, And I swear to God, 2 months ago, I'm sitting in one of these meetings on Zoom, and people are talking about, well, the next time something comes here, and they're having this whole theoretical conversation, and I'm like, is nobody paying attention to monkeypox? Like, this was a pseudo-government body who was preparing advice that it was this very high-level theoretical advice. And I was like, man, you guys are talking about bubble, right? Big bubble.
Yep.
Big
bubble. That's right.
So
that's right.
I got to tell you, like, I don't know when this episode will air, but in this week when we're recording this is the week that Dr. Walensky did something that nobody ever does. In my experience, it's very rare to find. She said, we're broken, we screwed up, we are responsible, we need to change. It begins there.
Yeah.
It begins there. It doesn't get, she told me yesterday, I think that may have been the easiest day of the next few months for me. And she's right. Doesn't solve it. It's not about operational change. It's not about organizational change. It's not about financial resources. It's about cultural change.
Yeah.
It's about understanding how to operate in wartime. I mean, again, when I talk about trouble, it's like I come in and this turnaround guy, it's always wartime for me when I'm involved. And so, like, the things you have to do in order to take risks, think ahead, talk to people in just as clear and simple and plain words as you can find. Sentences that have beginnings and ends, proverbs, not essays. Like, research, I mean, we got a bunch of wonderful people in the CDC who've been trained to publish great research and get to the right answer. That is exactly what we need, 9 years out of 10 or 19 years out of 20. But 1 year out of 10 or 1 year out of 20 or 1 year out of 50,
that's right.
We need something different than that. And we had the same people without a structure, without a culture, without a focus of how to make that difference. And to pick one part of your question of you asked about the next pandemic, it's only one slice of the question. But I think it is representative of some amount of cultural change that we need to do throughout public health agencies, federal, state, and also other people who are leaders, whether leading a business or leading a state, leading government, leading a nonprofit, getting reps and getting smarter. Because in Asia, when there's a new bug, new pandemic, new virus, like people are like, oh yeah, we've seen that. We know that. We put on masks, we do this, we do that. It becomes second nature. So how many times do Americans need to learn the lesson? Like, that's always the age-old question. How many times do we need to learn something before we get it? Clearly, it took more than twice because we didn't really do it well at monkeypox. But we got a chance with polio now. How good news is that?
Right. So listen, CDC, the name has changed since I was a student, from the Centers for Disease Control to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So the same people can't be doing both jobs. Okay, that's the whole idea. The same people can't be doing both jobs. You either control or you prevent. So prevention has been neglected in that agency because they've been reacting against a whole bunch of things like Legionnaire's disease and Lyme disease and West Nile virus and maybe influenza, but they've taken that for granted now, so they don't react so much to it. And now this big pandemic, the same people that reacted to the outbreaks are not the people that will prevent the next outbreak. Those are different people, and they're not there yet.
Right, and the pace is picking up, and we know it's going to pick up.
They aren't there yet, and they're not being hired, and they're not even being trained. That's the other thing. How do you train somebody to predict the future correctly?
With empathyology.
National security, yes. It's national security training.
Theology. I call that theology.
Well, no, it's also national security training. I mean, people who are in national security.
Yeah, that works.
Do this work. They think about this work constantly. I mean, some of my friends in Homeland Security and in NSC, like, they red team, black team all day long. I mean, what the thing that, like, you know, from a national defense standpoint, like, there is someone right now, I don't know who it is, but I guarantee you there's someone right now who spent every waking moment thinking about what happens if India attacks Pakistan.
Oh, absolutely.
And every single thing
China attacks Taiwan.
And that person's entire life work may never be needed, may never be worth anything. But if it is, we will be that much further ahead. And look, let's not stop totally beating ourselves up. Let's pat ourselves on the back a little bit. We developed the mRNA platform starting decade or two or more ago.
Yeah, that's right. That is exactly right.
We did things that helped us. We did things before that we didn't know what the purpose was, that later on ended up being valuable. We can do it. We certainly have the talent to do it. We certainly have the resources to do it. We certainly have the intelligence to do it. But we got to have the culture. We got to have the culture, the leadership, and the focus. But and we're not going to. And I don't think the expectation is get it right every time and get every element of it right. But we can be good at this. I mean, I know we can be good at this.
But so Andy, here's the problem. The science will work. It took a year. That was amazing. It's not going to take less. So in that intervening year, you have to protect people with things that may not be science-based, right? And that's the issue. Because science will come up with a vaccine for the next one. It'll take a year. They'll come up with antivirals. It'll take a year. But a lot of people die in that year. So what can you do? That's the issue.
Right. Well, I talked about this very thing in my book, which is that we have two lines of defenses when something bad happens, whether it's a war, whether it's a pandemic. Our first line of defense are the things that we essentially paid for as a government, the experts we've hired, the money we've invested, in this case, the CDC and the FDA. And we are used to in the U.S., because we are a wealthy nation, saying all we need is that one line of defense. But by God, when that first line of defense falters and we actually have to go to our second line of defense, it's like what happens in the bar when the bad guys get past the bouncer. There's no other defense. They walk into the bar and they beat the crap out of everybody because we're sitting there going, hey, the bouncers were supposed to keep you out.
Right.
And when we are left to the best defense, it turns out, is each other. Like, the truth is, if you watch any of those pandemic movies, Outbreak or whatever, like, the real way the movie should end as a horror movie is like, not like, oh my God, we've got to go get the top 2 or 3 scientists in the world. They can solve this. Then we're all like, okay, good, that'll happen. But if it's like, oh my God, we need the whole world to cooperate. And then like movie ends. Poof.
Right.
Like, okay, then like everybody looks at each other like, okay, we can't do that. If we need to call in the best and brightest, as you said, like, we're going to have a certain amount of faith that's going to happen. But the question is, and this is a lot of what my book was about, where is the empathyology? Because it has to start with that. Like, where does that come from? And I trail the experience of an Amazon worker in this book and contrast it with the people on the other side of what I call the room service pandemic, who are like, hey, I'm going to order this from Amazon and kick back, wear my sweatpants, and watch Zoom and Netflix. And then I got this guy.
What's wrong with that?
It's nothing wrong with it. I did it, but Ahmed Aiden.
We all did it.
But Ahmed Aiden was the guy who was working in the Amazon warehouse, who was packing those boxes.
Yeah.
Who got COVID.
And the meat packers too.
Amazon stopped paying him because he couldn't find a test because it was early on. There were no tests to prove he had COVID, so he could get paid. So he went home to his 2-bedroom apartment with his 5 kids, one of whom has cerebral palsy and a wife who had cancer, and basically lived in his bedroom while his wife moved in with his kids. And there's no isolation. 3 of his kids got it. Thankfully, not the kid with cerebral palsy. But this was his COVID experience, and it was a very common COVID experience. And that's all in the numbers and the statistics that we see. But for me, sitting here, I have to have a really honed sense of empathy to know about the guy who's putting the package in the Amazon box. And even someone like me who thinks about empathy a lot, it's overbearing to think about every single person in the country who's suffering and all the ways that they're suffering. So, especially because we have people who have so many different types of lived experiences. If you're in Sweden or you're in Japan, most people have experiences that are similar to the experiences that you have, because we've got our income cap and floor is much closer. The top decile and the bottom decile are much closer. Here in the U.S., Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Ahmed Aiden, who works for him, are very far apart, not just in income, but in every element of their life. And after a while, it becomes harder for the people with power and money, et cetera, to really respond appropriately to the people that actually suffer the most during the pandemic. And we talked about that a little bit earlier.
So, Andy, the best way, evolution has a solution to this already that we've not been paying attention to at all, and that's called redundancy. The redundancy of our biological systems starts with the first line of defense. Brianne, I'm going to step on your toes right now. You've got your skin, and then you've got your T cells, and then you've got your B cells, and then you've got your antibodies, and then you've got your innate immune system. You've got a number of systems that help you overcome an infection that doesn't go on to be a disease as long as your nutrition is good. So people, you're right, people who are properly nutritioned are the ones that can afford it. The ones that can afford it, they get infected, they don't get that sick. And they say, there's nothing wrong with it out there. What's wrong with you people? You're not looking at this right. So why not redundancy at certain other levels? Because I think that most people would say, well, you're wasting your money if you do the same thing twice. But I think when you have a disease control and a disease prevention system at the same time with different people, and then they talk to each other, is a lot better than calling your whole agency 2 things when you really mean you're only one thing, basically, in your control. That's all you are. You react when things outbreak, and then you go and do something. EIS officers are famous for that. But to get somebody to come in and say, we better stop doing this, because if we don't, bad things will happen. Like, for instance, preventing ships from other countries from coming into our harbors, dumping their bilge water in our harbors, going up a freshwater river, filling their hulls with fresh water, and taking that back to their country for drinking water. That actually goes on. But when they dump their bilge, of course, bad things happen, like zebra mussels and all kinds of other disease entities that can come into this world quickly. They take advantage of these things. So having redundant multiple systems is the best way to prevent. And we don't have any of that, except maybe in the military.
Yeah, or NASA.
Or NASA, exactly. Or an airplane pilot.
Yeah.
They've got 3 switches for the same damn function.
You can't always afford to be able to do it, but what I always...
Well, look what happened when we didn't.
you may not have the time or whatever, but in general, like I agree with you 100%. And I'll make a comment about it. Two comments about it. One is that always try to leave yourself a second route out of the jungle.
That's right.
You have one path, and then the lion comes into that path.
Yes.
So we all do that. We all know that, and that is what you're talking about.
Indeed.
The other comment I'd make is, I suggest to people decide what the most important thing is, optimize for that, and be willing to treat everything else as secondary. And if you can't do that, you're going to get into real trouble. And sometimes we don't really know. And they're hard decisions. I'm not suggesting that they don't require debate, but is it saving if it's saving lives, then you focus on the nursing homes and you vaccinate old people, et cetera. If it's learning loss, you focus on teachers. Where we get muddled is when we trying to do what you say, which is have redundancy, but not everybody agrees or has even articulated what the ultimate goal is. Now put aside Trump, put aside someone working against and denying, and just even say, look, with well-meaning, well-intended people, you're not going to get there if you don't say, this is our goal, this is what we need to do, and this is the most important thing. And yes, other things will suffer while we achieve that goal. Sometimes, again, you can't afford to do that. Sometimes more is expected. But particularly in a crisis, it really helps if you have a very clear battle statement. And I think there were times in this pandemic when we did. When we got the vaccine and the job was vaccinate as many people as quickly as possible, like we all knew. There was some certainty, there was some clarity. But there have been plenty of times when different people have thought different things are important. And I'd say that just like your point about redundancy, that also has to happen.
So I wonder a little bit about, if we have complex problems, there's a huge literature that shows that we need a diversity of expertise to help, or it's going to be the best at solving those problems. On the other hand, there needs to be a balance so that we don't have people with disproportionate influence who are coming in who don't really have the expertise, who aren't staying in their lanes. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about, how that could be shaped going forward.
That's one of my favorite questions I think I've heard ever, not just on this podcast. In some part because I don't think there's a clean answer. And I like those questions very much. Because it's a cop-out to say they're situational. I would just tell you how I do it. Tough decision to make, or how the best people I know do it as well. Tough decision to make. Number one, make sure everyone in the room that's got something to add feels comfortable saying it. If that doesn't happen, you are screwed, and we have lots of examples of that. Number two, make sure there's enough people in the room that you will get that voice in that disagreement. Number three, make sure people who don't have anything particularly to add that's different are very comfortable not opening their mouth. And model that by saying, hey, this is all your guys' lane. When it's time, I don't really have an opinion here. You guys are the experts. And then think about the people not in the room. And I spend so much time picking up the phone, calling people, hey, what do you think of this? This is what I'm hearing. What do you think of this? This is a tough decision. What do you think of this? What do you think of this? Hey, how does this affect your community? 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 And as much as possible, create a 360 portrait. So you come back and you're like, okay, well, look, the mosaic is, first of all, I found the 5 people who've done this before, and they all think the same thing. And I know people who are, because you've got general knowledge and specific knowledge. At the general knowledge level, the 5 experts all say the same thing. There's got to be merit to that. Now, at the specific level, in this specific situation, I've got a whole bunch of people that are really close to the ground on this, and they agree with those 5 experts. Okay, we're done. But sometimes people on the ground say, no, that doesn't work in this particular case because we got these kinds of things. And then a good leader irons it out, gets to the right answer. And then, by the way, if you're not positive, you do exactly what Vincent was saying, is you don't put all your eggs in that basket. You say, we're going to do this. And I'll give you an example. One example. I got into White House, and there were none of the vaccines people thought there were. There was no inventory. There was a high demand. People were getting on websites. 2,800 people were dying a day. And I find out that only 45% of the vaccines actually getting shipped out were making their way into people's arms. 55% of the vaccines we are producing, sending out, poof, into the ether, gone, nowhere to be found. And we have they built no tracking RFID inventory system or anything. We don't even know where they are. Gone. And so I think we're going to get some of the way there by figuring that out, and we will never get there by not figuring that out. And knowing the right answer to that question of where these vaccines are turned out to be very important. Just turned out to be very, very important.
I'm sure.
And what I ended up understanding from having lots of conversations from lots of people once I saw it became very, very clear, which is what? In a shortage, people do what? They hoard.
Yes.
And so I'm a doc. I'm going to give Vincent his vaccine, and I'm going to put one away for later because I don't know if I'm going to get another one. Or I don't know if someone's going to come in as an emergency. So maybe I'm going to put even another one away. And so what did I do? I said we are going to have to create significant predictability, and it's going to take a week or two for people to trust us. But we are going to say, you're going to get this number of vaccines this week, and every week you will never get less. And then 2 weeks in advance, we're going to announce how many more we're going to give you, and you're going to get exactly that many. And we need you to all through the channel make the same promise to everybody else so there's predictability. And then after about 6 or 7 days of it, I said, I need you all to take the vaccines out of your freezer and start using them. And all of a sudden, in the next couple of days, we had a rush of people getting vaccinated. So, it doesn't matter when you go approach a problem like that, Kathy, whether you have the knowledge, you just need to make sure you've got people in the room who, and by the way, had all kinds of theories about, the vaccines are getting lost here, they're getting shipped there, they sent to the wrong places. There's a million theories that go around, and they all sound plausible. But you have to make sure, do I have the right people in the room? Do I need to get more people in the room? Do people feel comfortable saying what they think? Can I then get to a general sense of consensus? And then, I find the answer. And by the way, if that turned out to be wrong, if I said, we're going to create predictability and go use your vaccines, and that turned out not to solve the problem, we wouldn't have lost anything.
It's an hour. I promised you an hour, okay? Thank you so much for joining us.
It was fun being here. Good luck with episode 930.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This was really informative.
Really
You
great.
have to come back.
Yeah, and I'm enjoying the book. I'm only halfway through, but I'm really enjoying it. So
it gets intense.
Well, I'm listening to it, so I can always stop listening.
You're listening to Bradley. You're listening to Bradley.
Yeah.
Bradley Woodford.
Yeah.
Who was nice enough to read the book.
Yeah.
We both have one thing in common, Andy. We both use the same publisher. My book is on a totally different subject, obviously, but St. Martin's Press is a good press.
Publishers.
Tell me about it. Let's not go there. That's podcast number 843.
Exactly. You guys are great. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate the invitation.
All right, thank you.
All right, take care.
We loved it.
Bye.
Now, let me just say one thing. Scientists don't predict, they answer questions. So the idea that Bill Joy predicted whatever he said he did,
Yeah, well, that's...
I don't think that means anything. One person out of 100 is always going to be right.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't think that means a thing, but it obviously impressed Andy. So anyway, I'm very depressed. I'm very depressed. Let's talk about viruses. It gets me uplifting. I really am, because what's the solution? So basically the idea is that negative information always predominates, right?
True.
Well, right. I mean, with an algorithmic platform and the business model for Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, all of those is exactly as Andy described it. It is to show exactly the information that's going to resonate with the person, the individual who is holding and scrolling it right this instant. And they're going to serve different information to different people in order to hit all the right buttons to get those people to click buy on something.
Yeah.
And it's going to be different things, but that's the whole advertising model. Thank you very much, Google. And so when you've got that kind of a fragmentation, you cannot flood the zone with truth and hope that it gets through, because that's not what's of interest to the person who's scrolling through who wants to believe something else.
This is really insidious, isn't it?
Yes, it is extremely insidious.
And
I do think I liked thinking about what he was talking about in terms of teams and ways that teams need to have kind of that diversity of background, like Kathy mentioned, but also kind of the things you need to do in terms of having the right team in the room to make useful decisions. I think that those were some really useful and important points.
And especially the part about asking yourself who's not in the room.
What if you have the right people in the room, but you don't listen to them because you're totally opposed to them, like all of Trump's press conferences?
Yeah, I mean, that's...
Then what do you do? And then you've got death threats to Tony Fauci and his family. Yeah. This is absurd. Totally absurd. So that has to stop somehow.
Yes, well, that was just a broken system.
How do you do that? Well,
I have no idea. I think we're lucky. I think we're lucky that we got out of it, but I'm not convinced we're not going to go back into it again.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
I'm very negative, unfortunately.
He had one concept that I liked, and this is one of the places where he was calling it COVID-19 and really should have been calling it SARS-CoV-2.
Yeah.
He said, think of SARS-CoV-2 as our starter bug. So.
Yeah, I want to point out, and I didn't feel like pointing it out because having listened to him, I would think it wouldn't resonate. But throughout his book, he calls the whole thing COVID-19. There's no distinguishing. Yeah. And I know he probably would say, who cares, Vincent? But
we care.
They know what I mean.
We do. And I think you need to get the facts right so that you don't confuse people.
That's up to the editor to help on that, though.
Well, the editor
Maybe
didn't
he didn't
fix
get much from St. Martin's Press.
No, they don't help that much, Dixon?
Well, it depends on the editor.
Yeah.
Anyway. Well, it is actually an important point that he should care about, because he points out, some people are getting impacted differently. Some people are getting SARS-CoV-2, and some people are being impacted with COVID-19.
Yes.
Right.
So just one last thing here. What do you think? Do you think this social media-driven screw-up of society is going to continue and just get worse and worse and really pollute everything? Or is there some way it evolves? Systems evolve to reach some kind of stasis, and is that going to happen?
As long as they can make billions of dollars selling lies and anything anybody wants to say, the answer is no.
Okay.
But so there are mixed there are mixed signs on that. I mean, the whole situation with Twitter, they're not necessarily going to be around or in the same shape 5 years from now as they were 2 years ago. And Facebook is struggling to reinvent themselves now that all the cool kids are on other platforms. And so there is some stuff going on with that could help. But yes, the fundamental business model on which we have built the World Wide Web is broken, and that is a very hard thing to fix.
Vincent, I would just point out that you've asked scientists to make a prediction.
Yes.
About social media.
You did just ask scientists to make
Well, I was thinking, I'm really glad that part of my job is understanding the immune system, something much easier than this question that Vincent's asking.
And it's redundant.
I know. I rail against prediction, and then I ask people, but I'm very negative about, and the other thing he said which is disturbing. The inequities in the U.S. are what fuel all these things, right? And that's never, ever changing because that's what the country is built on, inequities. So,
and it's something that we don't look at enough.
But that is something that has empirically changed over a period of even my lifespan. What we're seeing now, the inequities that we see now, 10,000-fold difference between the top and the bottom, that was not the case 40 years ago. And the numbers prove that. You can look back and see that CEOs were not billionaires in the 1980s. They were millionaires, but they were not billionaires. And that gap has widened progressively from Reaganomics onward and has gotten worse and worse, and we've built it into our system. That means we could unbuild it. The system doesn't have to be like that. I'm not going to predict whether we will unbuild it, but that is something that could be done.
I think that's actually the more interesting question, not whether we can unbuild it or not, but is it possible to, right? That's a mechanistic question, which I agree, and that would satisfy Kathy for me not asking to predict, right? But I went to to Cornell this week, and it was a student-run symposium, and they had a linguistics professor from UC Irvine there who talked about linguistic bias, okay, which I have never thought a minute about in my life, who was so compelling.
Because you're biased against linguists.
No, just you listen, and his whole thing was you listen to how a person talks, and you immediately judge them, and you assume because they're speaking in a funny way that they don't know anything. And he put case after example of how this happens. And he said, these are individuals who learn a language, and language is fluid, and you shouldn't penalize them for speaking their language. He even played a debate between Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, who with one saying, you're not speaking Spanish, you're speaking some other kind of language. And he said, that's the other thing is people come from other countries, and then their language becomes a mixture, and you shouldn't hold that against them. And I'd never thought of that, but it's absolutely right. So that's just one fraction of the bias, right? The fragmentation that we have. It's based on our language. And what can you do? It's like a Tower of Babel, right?
I think it's Babel.
Babel. Babel. I pronounce a lot of things wrong.
Sorry, I had to do something.
But I have I want to know Babel.
I think I've heard of Babelfish. So
it could be. It could be either. I just had to make a pronunciation correction.
So, by the way, Dixon and I were talking in the pre-show just to change the subject. To rename monkeypox. Kathy asked you on the email or text, whatever we were doing. So, someone sent me an idea for renaming monkeypox as smaller pox.
Smaller pox. Oh. Well, I was thinking it should be medium pox because great pox is syphilis, and we've got smallpox, and so we should have medium pox.
Medium pox. That's good.
And you wouldn't have to change abbreviations. It would still be an M. So.
Oh, right.
Anyway, I wanted to go over three reports that came out in the past days or so, and they're kind of interesting. One is an MMWR report on the local case of polio. So this is August 16th. Public health response to a case of paralytic poliomyelitis in an unvaccinated person and detection of poliovirus in wastewater. New York, June, August 2022. So this is out of the CDC. And so all the details are here now, which is quite interesting. Have you seen this?
Yes, I haven't had a chance to read it, but I did. It popped up in my news feed. It's basically the write-up of the case that was previously just posted on the New York Public Health site. But now they've got actually all the data and the rundown of what was done. This is
quite interesting. June 22, a young adult had 5-day history of low-grade fever, neck stiffness, back and abdominal pain, constipation, 2 days of bilateral lower extremity weakness. That means his legs weren't working well. Went to the ER, was hospitalized with suspected acute flaccid myelitis, and as part of the history, they learned that he was not vaccinated for polio. And then he was discharged. They did RT-PCR of a stool sample, and they found poliovirus, and of course, polio type 2 vaccine-derived.
I wanted to ask you about that because they reported that they had looked at other things that were negative, nasopharyngeal swabs, CSF samples was negative.
Yeah. Too late.
Okay.
Because by the time you get paralysis, it's too late to find virus there. Yeah.
Even in the CSF. Okay.
Yeah. Well, with polio, interestingly, it's very hard to find virus in the CSF for reasons that are not clear at all.
Okay.
So they say based on the incubation period, we figured the exposure occurs 7 to 21 days before paralysis, and it turns out this person went to a big gathering 8 days before symptom onset. Didn't go anywhere else, so that's maybe there was fecal contamination of the doorknob in the bathroom. Who knows, right? And that's how you would acquire this. So then they go on to talk about how they did wastewater sampling, 260 wastewater samplings from treatment plants in Rockland and Orange counties, including samples originally collected for SARS-CoV-2.
Mm-hmm.
So they tested them. 21 or 8% were positive by PCR, and 13 from Rockland County, 8 from Orange County. 20 specimens from samples collected during May, June, and July were also positive and linked genetically. They had the similar virus sequence to the patient's sample. So that's quite interesting.
Was there any clustering with regards to the treatment plants?
They don't report that.
They don't really talk about that, no.
Because you said 8%. 8% of what?
Of all the samples, yeah. It's just a total number, right?
So they would know where they're from, though, right?
Yeah, they didn't report it, though, yeah. You remember when we had the New York wastewater team on who were sampling SARS-CoV-2? They wouldn't tell us where the plants were that they got.
Naturally.
They weren't allowed to.
Because then people would make assumptions about who's unclean and who's not, and it's not productive to have those discussions. No, because that's not the case. That's
so here now they talk a little bit about immunization. This is quite interesting. So according to the immunization system, 3-dose polio coverage. So you need 3-dose series of polio. IPV in this country, inactivated polio vaccine among infants and children less than 2 years of age in Rockland County was 67% in July 2020, 60% by August 2022, with zip code specific coverage as low as 37%. So in some zip codes, it was 37%. So it goes down, I guess, because of COVID, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So it
because
drops
of people not going to the pediatrician.
Yes.
In 2 years, it drops from 67 to 60% coverage.
Right.
And so national coverage, U.S., is 92.7% among infants born from 2017, 2018. And that's where it should be.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But
Better.
It would be great if they told us what it was now post-pandemic, because you might imagine that Rockland County is not the only place where they saw a decrease in the pandemic.
This means that anti-vaxxers are selective in their anti-vax.
Yes, and that's well documented. There are demographic differences.
That's incredible.
And you find certain groups of people are particularly on that side, and Rockland County, New York, for those who are not in the area, this is not some poor, rural, remote area where it's hard to find a doctor. This is where the doctors live. It's just up the Hudson River from New York City.
It is to New York.
It is suburban New York. It's as wealthy and well provided with medical care as any place.
So here's the sad part. So as you may remember, they did say, okay, you need to get vaccinated. They set up, clinics and so forth. They say there was a brief increase in IPV administration, but was not sufficient to meaningfully increase population coverage levels. So I think they gave out 400 or 500 doses. It's not enough to do anything.
No.
So a lot of people are still susceptible, and there's virus in the wastewater, so it's not a good thing.
Lesson is don't drink the wastewater.
Well, but there are people walking around pooping this stuff, and it's going to spread. And it's going to spread not just among the unvaccinated, it will spread among the vaccinated because we use inactivated polio vaccine, which still allows people to be carriers. They won't get sick, but they will continue to spread the virus. And that's probably a reason why you have it from 8% of your sampled sewage, because this is not one person. who's touring restrooms in Rockland and Orange County. This is a whole circulating population, and I think we probably just have circulating type 2 poliovirus.
I would say wherever you look, you're going to find it.
Yes.
Right?
So in the 1950s, the sewage treatment plants of America were in bad need of upgrading. Mm-hmm. And the polio outbreak actually forced the government to do just that. And so 1960s through the 80s, the treatment plants increased to not releasing slightly contaminated water. They released treated water. And I think that's been the big difference. The sanitation has really improved dramatically.
And none of that infrastructure has been updated, right?
No. It was.
Right, but I mean, since the 60s, a lot of it is quite old at this point.
That's right. So they went from a type 1 to a type 2 treatment plant to get rid of the wastewater. They actually put it through another batch of treatments to reduce the risk below transmission, it seems. Because if you find the virus, but you don't find the infection, this tells you something about sanitation, and it actually works when it's done correctly.
People are not getting it from contaminated drinking water.
No, they're not.
But they will be getting it at the playground.
It's the sewage, Dixon, is a indicator of what's present, right?
Understood. No, I understand.
What happens is when someone has fecal contamination of their hands, that's how it's transmitted. But
before this, it was going back into the fresh water.
It was in the drinking water in FDR's time.
Exactly.
So the discussion is very interesting. They say, so what this means, because we've had positive samples through several months, there's a chain of transmission in the U.S., and it must have started with someone who came in who was in a country where they received OPV, because we don't use OPV here, and it had to have a type 2 OPV, which is only used now if there's an outbreak. So most of the world is getting bivalent OPV, type 1 and 3 only. Type 2 was taken out of it in 2016. But if there's an outbreak of type 2, then they come in with
type 2.
With type 2, and that reintroduces it. So someone got it from one of these outbreaks, and now it's transmitting here. It does so, as Alan said, because IPV, actually both IPV and OPV do not permanently immunize your gut.
Right.
Even OPV will transiently immunize your gut, but as we know, antibody levels contract, right? So you're going to get infected.
Thank goodness they do.
So you will be infected. Even if you've got OPV, you have a memory response, which will limit the shedding, but you will shed, but you won't get paralyzed with either vaccine. So this is a statistic I did not know. For type 2, so we always say, 1 in 100 or 1 in 200 people that are infected get paralytic disease, right? For type 2, it's 1 in 1,900. I didn't know it was different. Did you know it was different?
I did not know it was different.
For type 2?
I was going to ask you that, Vincent. I drew a big circle around it.
I didn't know that. And I've been arguing with Amy lately. She's been saying 1 in 2,000. I said, no, that's not right. She said, yes, I'm right. And she's right.
She's always right.
Nobody can be always right, okay? Anyway, and they go on. And you know what the funny thing is here? I talked to multiple reporters last week, right? And I told them all, IPV does not prevent intestinal infection. So Jeff Kluger of Time Magazine did not know that. Brianna Abbott of the Wall Street Journal did not know that. And both these stories were published. Today, I got an email from the public relations people at Columbia saying, did you misspeak saying IPV doesn't prevent infection? And right here in that goddamn article, IPV does not prevent intestinal infection and therefore does not prevent polio transmission. Why would they think I made a mistake? How many years have been
by the Wall Street Journal?
Infection does not equal disease.
Right.
J School gets all its money from Wall Street.
And I said this on WNYC when when I was interviewed. Commented that the IPV does not prevent transmission.
So one more sentence from this article. Until polio eradication is achieved worldwide, importations of both wild polio and vaccine-derived poliovirus in the U.S. are possible. Alan, how are we achieving polio eradication?
Oh, well, by the year 2000, we will have eliminated polio. Didn't you hear?
We're using mostly OPV.
Yes.
So all we have done is replace wild poliovirus with vaccine-derived polio. So how are we going to eradicate vaccine-derived polio, Alan?
I would suggest we would need to go through a phase of IPV to get everybody off the OPV. But I don't know if that'll gain any traction with the WHO.
But I don't think that would even work because
if only we could go back in time and tell them, Vincent.
But your intestines are still going to be infectable. So if you switch everyone to IPV, the vaccine strains are going to circulate. And, so I've been thinking about this lately. I think we're screwed. We can't eradicate polio.
Well, and one of the things with this paper, I mean, they're talking about, we're still going to have these imported IPV. And I'm thinking, y'all just analyze the sewage, and it may have been imported originally, but we don't know when, and it's certainly circulating here now. So I would no longer call this imported.
No, I mean,
it's just here.
It's here. I agree. And you know what's interesting? The CDC will not release the genome sequence, only just say that it's type 2 SAB. Do you know why they won't release it? Because if someone gets it, they could do a molecular clock and figure out how long it's been
circulating.
And I'll bet it's been here a really long time.
I bet it's not new.
And they don't want to tell. And this is dysfunctional CDC. Maybe they're going to change. Maybe they're going to be more open. I don't know. But I've been complaining about this. First, they wouldn't give out the primer sets for doing this because a lot of people have been emailing me saying, how do you do this? They won't give them out. And then they won't give out the genome sequence.
Oh, that's problem.
This is not how to do public health.
That's not how to do science.
Very unlike the CDC.
That too.
Very much unlike them.
Anyway, but as Andy said, the CDC announced they're going to have a reorg.
Yes.
And they're going to change their culture.
Well,
okay.
Well,
good luck with
cultures
that.
and viruses.
Does that mean that you're going to turn the temperature up on the incubator?
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's really hard to change the culture of a institution overnight,
Very
right?
difficult. Very difficult.
Anyway, good luck. I have two more quick things here. Let's see. What was the second one? Evidence of human-to-dog transmission of monkeypox virus. So Rich sent us this. I don't know if he sent it to everyone. He sent it to me earlier in the week. This is a one-page, 1.5-page Lancet correspondence. Who sent this in here? This is from authors in France, Sorbonne in Paris, basically. So what this is here is, so how is monkeypox virus transmitted? We're always saying close contact with lesions and fluids and so forth. So can cats and dogs get infected? So this is a dog who is the pet of two men who have sex with men. One of them is HIV positive, but low viral loads. He's on antivirals. The second is HIV negative. They live together. They're non-exclusive partners living in the same household. They had presented with ulcerations typical of monkeypox 6 days after sex with other partners. And monkeypox was found in their lesions. 12 days after symptom onset, their male Italian greyhound presented with mucocutaneous lesions, and they were tested, and they were positive for monkeypox virus. And they did the sequence, and it's clearly the same virus from the men that infected the dog. And the men sleep with the dog.
We should change the name to puppypox.
Puppypox virus, yes. No, then people would want to get it.
So now we know that dogs can be infected,
and have some symptoms.
And they actually develop lesions. Yeah.
The rats in Africa get it. So
they say
we hypothesize virus.
We hypothesize a real canine disease, not a simple carriage of virus by close contact with humans or airborne transmission. So if you have monkeypox, you should
don't play with the dog.
Don't play with the dog. I don't know about cats. They could
probably
get it right.
Yeah,
they'll prevent a dog from licking you if he wants to, or she.
Yeah, given the breadth of other organisms it infects.
Yeah, a cat gets your hand, plays, claws it, and everything, and you've.
So, really, this is a human virus now, right? It's no longer a zoonosis. It's
been
spreading human to human.
So we need to name it
human pox.
Human pox 2. How's that? Because we have
people
smallpox. Human pox? No, you want people pox?
People pox?
I don't think that's going to
No,
work.
I don't think that'll work.
Puppy
I like
pox,
medium
yeah.
pox.
Yeah, that's the WHO has
Everybody's
no
pox.
sense of humor. They'll never do that.
Or we should just rename all the pox viruses tall, venti, and no.
Oh, that's Starbucks. They're not
Oh,
going to
right,
like
that's
that.
Right.
I refuse to use those words when I order coffee.
I always just get a small coffee.
Small, medium, or large.
They know what you're asking
Figure it
for.
out. I think
Yeah.
that's so pretentious. But sorry, that's not right. All right, one more little article. This is from, I guess, Emerging Infectious Diseases, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which is a publication of the CDC. Human monkeypox without viral prodrome or sexual exposure, California, USA, 2022. So
These folks are from Stanford.
from Stanford, that's
Spontaneous
right.
pox.
Yeah, a number of individuals from Stanford University School of Medicine, right? So this is a man in his 20s who went to an emergency department at Stanford on day 7 of an asynchronous diffuse vesicular rash. So asynchronous means the rash, the pustules are coming up at different times, not all at once, right? Following travel to the UK, the lesion appeared 14 days after he attended a large, crowded outdoor event at which he had close contact with others, including close dancing for a few hours. He said many attendees were in sleeveless tops and shorts. He wore pants and a short sleeve tops.
I think the story can end right there.
Yeah.
They go on and on about how, he didn't have sexual contact and da-da-da-da-da. And it's like,
Yeah.
what?
That was it.
You were in a mosh pit. Yeah.
So he got lesions when he got back, and they're positive for monkeypox. Yeah.
Let's hope the same was true for the human to dog transmission.
Yes, I'm sure it was. The dog, if you, a dog gets into bed and it curls up, and yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, the only other thing that they mention is sharing an e-cigarette, and he did have some lesions on his lips.
That could have done it, right?
Possibility, sure.
Yeah.
Sounds like a case for Inspector Pierrot.
Said they conclude this case highlights the potential for spread at such gatherings, which may have implications for epidemic control. I would think so.
Sure.
And it also says the lack of both sexual exposure and anogenital involvement indicates that mode of transmission may be associated with clinical symptoms, fomites, hotel bedding and sheets, high-touch areas in public settings may be alternative modes of transmission. And that's what Michael Merchlinsky said, right? I asked him, could you get it from someone's contaminated hand? He said, sure. Why not?
This is going to be a politician disease.
Why do you say that, Dixon?
Because they're
of
always shaking
handshaking.
people's hands and kissing
Yes.
little babies.
You know, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the other thing they point out is that local testing allowed them to diagnose this in less than 12 hours.
Yeah.
So they didn't have to send it off to some state or community lab. They could just do it right there at Stanford.
Right.
Yeah, I think that people shouldn't necessarily underestimate things like the clothing or bedding in terms of fomites
Absolutely
and transmission.
right.
I've always sort of
Absolutely right.
been horrified by stories I've read about that, similar things to that in the past. And it's hard because we don't want to scare people by saying, monkeypox could be on all sorts of objects.
Right.
That's not a great message.
So,
But at the same time, I don't know that we should underestimate the fact that, yes, it can sometimes be on something that was contaminated either.
yeah, for sure.
That's not the dominant mode of transmission, but it's
Can
certainly
happen.
something
It
that
can
can
happen, yeah. And so, yes. So there are no risk factors because it's not just having sex, right? It can be other things too.
Right.
People have to understand this. Yeah.
Absolutely right.
So Slavitt said that we're blowing the monkeypox thing basically, but we have 2 vaccines, right? It's just that we don't have enough of them yet, correct?
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, this is a virus that wasn't new.
That's true. Yes, of course.
Yeah.
It's a virus that we already had a vaccine and already had antivirals for.
Yeah.
There's a lot that was in our favor in this case that maybe wasn't if we compare to the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
True.
And so you might expect that things could have gone a little better.
And it's a less contagious virus. This is not something where everybody who attended the choir practice gets monkeypox. This is, you gotta have some.
Right.
Yeah, you could get it from a hotel blanket, but if they wash the sheets, it's pretty unlikely.
Yeah.
And
we should have some experience thinking about stigma in different populations from the AIDS pandemic.
We certainly should, shouldn't we?
I think this is a great point. The biggest point is that there have been several hundred cases every year in Africa since smallpox vaccination ended, and we should have done something about it, right?
Yes.
And we didn't. So that's that's the failure. I totally agree with that.
A failure of empathyology.
What is the word?
Empathyology.
Empathyology.
So should we have that in our title?
Maybe.
How do you spell empathy?
Empathy. EMPATHY.
Eology.
I wouldn't put the E in there.
I would just write empathy and then
ology.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
See, don't ever let Vincent make up words because he's with Andy.
Slavitt.
That's pretty good. Maybe we'll do that. All right. Anyway, let's just do a couple of emails, okay? Because we don't have to all do one. Just do a few. Maybe Kathy could take that first one.
Sure. Paul writes, TWiV crew, thanks so much for having Dr. Offit on the show. He's one of my favorite repeat guests. The Omicron-specific booster for the fall is a critical issue, and not for the obvious reason. Public health needs to get a call right. Unfortunately, public health has done a less than stellar job educating the public about COVID vaccines so far. From overplaying the initial 94% efficacy against symptomatic infection and promises of greatly reduced spread, public health's message has had to be continually recalibrated to a more realistic outlook. SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, like most vaccines, are meant to prevent severe disease and death. Unless told otherwise, most Americans will assume that a variant-specific vaccine will offer noticeable efficacy over the original. I've even read comments from virologists indicating this belief. The general public doesn't understand somatic hypermutation, affinity maturation, and immune imprinting. I had hoped that TWiV 917 would have covered these topics more in depth. Some may consider these phenomena too complex for the general public, but without understanding each, the public will never grasp why an Omicron-specific vaccine may only offer minimal benefit over the wild type. Dr. Offit mentioned that he considered the mRNA vaccines a 3-dose treatment, and that the 3rd dose greatly increased the breadth. Although true, it's misleading to not explain why. It's not something magical about a 3rd shot. It's that the 3rd shot, as an immunological challenge, turns on the hypermutated quiescent memory B cells that the body created over the preceding 6 months or more since the first immunizations. Through hypermutation and affinity maturation, the body creates such breadth and quality within memory B cells that an Omicron-specific challenge may not bring significantly more to the immune repertoire. Further, immune imprinting might partially limit additional breadth in the future, in future immune memory. Perhaps there will be additional somatic hypermutation after an Omicron-specific immunization, but this is unknowable at the moment. Public health needs to better educate the public about SARS-CoV-2 vaccine immunology and take a more pragmatic stance on the potential benefit of an Omicron-specific vaccine, or risk a continued erosion of credibility with the general public. Love the show, Paul.
I think this is what Andy was talking about, right?
Yes.
I mean, this is too complicated, first of all. And secondly, it's a mix. Now we're giving a mixed message, right? Because you have a division. Some people say you need this Omicron booster, and some people say you don't. And that's not good for public health, is it?
No.
No. But what you need here is an educator who appreciates the use of Homeric simile to try to use examples that everyone's familiar with.
It's about metaphors.
Way of teaching about something that's more complicated and saying, well, the same thing is also true for your immune system as you could. That's that sort of thing. And it's difficult to come up with metaphors and analogies to a system that is not fully understood even by immunologists.
Yeah.
Pardon, I'm sorry, Brianne, but I have to say.
No, it's absolutely.
So every time you pick up the Journal of Immunology, you go, I didn't know that.
There's a dual message here. Okay, there's the science, but I don't think people need to know this science. I mean, we love it, and he says we should have discussed it on that episode. Well, we've talked about it on other episodes. That's the way TWiV is. It's spread out over years and years, unfortunately. You don't like it? I'm sorry. But the other is the public health message, right? Which people are debating
That's right.
whether you need this or not.
Message.
And that's a death knell to public uptake, okay?
Totally
That's
agree.
the bottom line. And I think it's a big problem. You know, I don't know when they rolled out IPV, then they rolled out OPV, they didn't have any debate. They just did it, right? Or maybe they didn't. I just don't remember.
At that time, there were, maybe 3 channels on television that most people could receive, and they could get a couple of radio stations and probably like 2 newspapers. So the available channels in which to have those discussions were much more restricted. And there was a lot wrong with that media ecosystem. I'm totally in agreement that we needed more diversity to it. But what we've gone to now is not getting the job done either.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I remember them announcing that all of the water systems of the United States that are drinkable will now be fluoridated. And the next thing you know, you were getting public opinions in the newspapers about how this is a communist plot, and it was during the MacArthur era, and it was just crazy. McCarthy era. The MacArthur, he had finished already, I guess, but McCarthy was really
we must maintain
the
the purity of our essence. Yeah.
A bad egg from start to finish.
I don't think the uptake of the booster is going to be so great anyway. It goes down with each subsequent dose, right?
Yeah.
I think we have a big problem. But I'm not going to make any predictions because it's not a good idea. However, I will ask Brianne to take the next one, please.
Sure. Gigi writes, "Hello, Twivers. I started listening during the pandemic, but have since logged hundreds of hours of listening as I go through the older episodes in order. I am a first-year grad student studying biochemistry, and the main thing I do outside of the lab is rock climbing, both indoors and outdoors. Having listened to the clinical updates with Dr. Daniel Griffin and understanding that monkeypox is primarily spread through contact with infected persons or objects, sheets, clothes, etc., what would you recommend for climbers? We are a sweaty bunch that touch all of the same plastic handholds in the gym and the same rocks outdoors. Should the spread of monkeypox via holds be a legitimate concern for climbers? Gyms have taken vastly different approaches to the COVID-19 pandemic, including mask mandates, limiting the number of people in the gym, and only allowing a certain number of problems to be climbed one day, and then leaving them untouched for 14 days before they can be climbed again. Do any of these solutions sound like a good plan of action, or should gyms be open to more creative solutions to keep their climbers safe? Climbers everywhere would appreciate your wisdom and guidance. Kindly, Gigi." I think that she brings up a really good point here. I do not know enough about climbing to know about how one might clean or disinfect holds.
I think you should just wash your hands.
Yes. And hopefully if you have lesions on your hands or lesions
Don't
that are
climb,
visible, don't climb.
But if you can not touch your face while you're climbing, right? Which is probably not hard because your hands are supposed to be holding on, right?
Right.
Then you wash your hands, and I think that solves the problem.
Probably. There's a certain amount of abrasiveness to the handhold.
Right.
It's been a long time since I did this, but
I didn't know that. Yeah.
They've got a kind of a grip to them. And I could certainly imagine, if somebody is relatively new to climbing, they don't have the calluses built up, they might be putting abrasions on their fingers and grabbing onto a handhold that somebody has held who had a monkeypox lesion on that hand would certainly be a risk, even if you washed your hands afterwards. Short of that, I think you're basically on the right track, that just washing hands before and after and asking people when they come to the gym, do you have any lesions?
Yeah, I think that's a big one.
Yeah. Anybody with lesions should not be climbing until those have cleared up. And wash your hands. It's not an activity you can do with gloves on. Right.
Dixon, could you take the next one?
Sure. In fact, I'll take the next 2. How's that?
If you wish.
Philip writes, of all the polio cases and all the polio found in wastewater,
she had to
how
walk
much
into
is
mine.
vaccine-derived polio versus the wild type? I'm sorry, what was that?
I was just going Casablanca on you, sorry. Of all the polio cases and all the polio found in wastewater, she had to walk into mine.
Right. Yeah. You are the one that I found at the bar.
Yes.
I found TWiV 756 fascinating about the shipping container colony set up to study a couple of new OPV vaccines. Any updates to report? Isn't a non-mutating OPV the only way we will see that virus gone for good? Take it, Vincent.
So we do have an update on the shipping containers. This is so cryptic.
They have arrived.
So that what they did is they modified type 2 OPV. It's called now NOPV, and they tested in people in those shipping containers. And it's now been given to 100.
They converted the shipping containers into living quarters with hospital visits, just so people know that they didn't put people in
and
shipping
being cryptic.
And then they shipped them off to...
Yes.
No, they put together...
They needed a temporary facility that they could use for containment. They built it out of containers.
Anyway, that virus has now been in 110 million kids, and we're going to do that next Friday. We're going to do that MMWR. Really interesting. Now, here's the thing. I would never bet against the virus mutating.
Absolutely
Never,
right.
ever. So we will talk about it next time. But it is changing, okay? That the sequence analysis shows that it's changing. So it's never going to be non-mutating. It's not possible. If a virus doesn't mutate, it will not exist. It will be so unfit, it will be banished from the face of the earth. But I would not bet against it not mutating. But you know what? If you replaced all the OPV with new NOPVs, then you'd have them circulating, right? So the only benefit would be if they don't cause paralysis, right?
I think that's so. The idea with NOPV is that yes, it can mutate, but it can't mutate back to being what we know of as paralytic.
And so that is the theory,
yes.
right? And I'm just not sure that that's the case. Okay.
Yes. But the experiment is certainly being done at scale now.
You wanted to take the next one, Dixon?
Well, I did. Well, the first one was pretty short. Hello, TWiV folks. I must stop in every week to hear what some of the coolest people on Earth are saying. I saw this article last week in Yale Climate Connections, which is a great publication, by the way. A great source for weather and climate information. It focuses on how nights are warming faster than days, making for a relentless 24-hour heat. Then he gives a reference. Thanks for your great work, everybody. David.
So you actually know of this Yale Climate Connection?
I've made use of it during the writing of my new book. Yes, I do know it. It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful.
Cool. I'm really happy to hear that we're the coolest people some of the coolest people on Earth.
But not at night because it's getting warmer.
Exactly.
I somehow don't think that Andy would think we're very cool. I don't know.
He's cooler. That's the problem.
No, I think we're just not argumentative enough.
I don't know. We can be pretty argumentative.
That's true. I was going to say to him, if you want to hear experts not to agree with each other, just attend a scientific meeting.
Yes.
And you're bound to hear 5 people who know a lot about that subject say, no, that's bullshit. What are you talking about?
When he talked about 5 experts agreeing, I was like, wow.
Yeah,
that
no, that sounds like the beginning of a joke.
Is it right?
All right. Let's do some picks of the week. Dixon, what do you got for us? What do you have for us?
I continue on with my march through the world of jazz. And I couldn't actually leave the big band era without mentioning or giving credit to Glenn Miller's orchestra. From 1940, which was the onset of World War II, to 1944, when he actually died in a bombing raid, but it wasn't clear what the circumstances were, and one of them suggested that he was in a bar. Another one suggested he was in a brothel. Nobody will know for sure, but he died in 1944. He was a trombone player, but he was actually noted for his gift in arranging music and in making new music, and this is a wonderful, wonderful album. You'll recognize the song In the Mood, of course, which was his signature song. And the album that has that and many other of the wonderful songs of the Glenn Miller era are on an album of outstanding arrangements, and I recommend it. It's good listening. If you're doing filling of test tubes or counting rabbits or whatever you do when you're in your lab. Counting plaques. Plaque assay, I think it would be great for plaque assay. I don't think I feel like doing it today. Okay, put on In the Mood. Bump it up, Oh, yeah, sure, here I go.
I know, that song. I know the melody. Yeah, Dixon, you were a trombone player too, right?
Still am.
Hey.
Once a trombone player,
I'm
always.
not a war anything yet.
You're still a parasitologist, I guess?
You bet.
Cool, very good. So this is your last...
And an amateur virologist.
This is your last big band?
My last big band, and we start on the small groups next.
Cool.
We're not done with jazz by a long shot.
Very good. You're inspiring me to do a series as well. I'm thinking...
Why not? You've already done a series on the great discoveries in virology.
Oh, yeah.
I did seminal papers, yeah. But
right.
You did.
I have an idea for one that has nothing to do with science, but...
that's the deal.
It's something I like, so I thought it would be fun to share, the top five.
Stick shift 60s BMWs by any chance?
No, I don't... not stick shift. I only
stick
had
shifts I have known.
No, I haven't had enough cars to be able to do that, but that's something else. Anyway, thank you, Dixon. Brianne, what do you have for us?
I have been getting a lot of people sending me fun microbiology-related things, and this is one that was sent to me recently. This is an Etsy site of cross-stitched microbes. And so there are many, many, many different bacteria, viruses, et cetera, parasites that are cross-stitched here. Also, I have the link to looking at the actual cross-stitched microbes, though if you look elsewhere on the site, she has patterns so you could make them herself or yourself. I feel a little sad about this because when we were talking in the pre-show, Dixon mentioned the flaws in the Entamoeba histolytica. So now I am terribly embarrassed by picking a flawed parasite. But it certainly is something that is a fun microbiology and virology related.
Nice.
They have like a picture of E. coli and then they have diarrhea written under it.
Okay.
I know.
But I understand because they actually say diarrhea microbe. So Campylobacter jejunum, that's fine. So they get it. Yeah. But it's still.
Speaking of E. coli, there's a big outbreak right now.
Where?
Chipotle?
It's a pan-USA outbreak. And it's being monitored by the CDC. And it's not the 0157H strain, but I'm sure it's causing havoc with a lot of people right now.
What do we know what product it was on?
We don't. I actually hadn't read that much about it. I just encountered this in my Yahoo News scanning.
Oh, Dixon, you're still looking at Yahoo News.
Oh, don't you like a good laugh? Come on, you can find so much misinformation in Yahoo News. It's incredible.
Oh, it's in beef.
No, it's in Michigan and Ohio.
Michigan and Ohio. All right.
Yep.
Soon, Michigan.
Yep. CDC is investigating it.
Okay.
Kathy, keep your eyes peeled.
Keep your eyes peeled. So I think I've seen.
Careful of beef.
I think I've seen this stitchery before. Yeah, it's cool.
Neat.
She does have hepatitis A there. Yeah. She could have made it bigger.
They're to scale.
But you guys have seen the
chlamydia should be on a bed-sized pillow.
So this is our pillows right behind it.
Yes.
And did I show you the knitted bacteriophage that someone gave me?
I don't know if I've seen the knit bacteriophage.
You can't.
I've seen other knit viruses.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see it in the image.
You have to move the camera.
I'm going to get it down for you.
There we go.
Oh, I thought it was a gigantic tarantula.
Wow.
No, that's a phage.
That's way cool.
So Mark Martin, the microbiologist, had this made for the incubator.
Nice.
So he commissioned a former undergraduate student of his. She's now a graduate student in UW Madison. I forgot what her name is. She's got a cute stitchy related name on Instagram. I'll put it in the show notes. And so she made this. So,
nice.
It stands up actually.
I like the stitching that gives it the
icosahedral.
Put it in the middle between you so that we can all see it.
You can't see it?
Nope.
Now people watching on YouTube are going to see it vanish from Vincent's screen and appear on mine. So
can you see it in between us? Yes.
I can see it right in between. Absolutely.
There it is, right in between.
And it stands up, and She put metal in the tail
so they can be
fibers.
posed.
That's very
Yeah, you
cool.
can move. And then she's got a nice base plate here. Which
phage is it?
It's a good question.
T.
Maybe it's a T something. I don't know. I don't want to say because I'll be wrong. But these things are really nice. All right. Thank you, Brienne. Kathy, what do you have for us?
Oh, I picked, where's my pick? There we go. The time trials for bottle emptying. I don't know how I came across
That's
this,
fantastic.
but they basically just show 3 different ways that if you empty a bottle, how fast it is. They time it, and it's limited by the air having to go in. And so, of course, the fastest way is if they put a straw in before they invert it. But what I really liked was the middle way, which is if you swirl it and you create a vortex, then the stuff will go out faster. And that seems like a really practical piece of knowledge.
I've been emptying bottles that way for years. Yeah.
Yeah. Somehow
you just
I never
swirl
knew
it
that.
around as it's.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Alan, what do you have for us?
A place that I was just at this afternoon. So it's called Meow Parlor. It is a cat cafe in New York City. And if you're not familiar with what a cat cafe is, this is something that apparently it's big in Japan. And now you can go to one in New York. If you're coming to visit the incubator and you're going to be in the city, it's actually down in Lower Manhattan, Lower East Side, Chinatown area. And you go in and I do recommend reservation because it fills up fast. They have a limited capacity, and you just sit with cats. You can get some cafe food. I had a croissant and sat there, and we made a trip partly to do this. We're visiting my mother-in-law, so my wife and daughter are hanging out with her, and she's been hemming and hawing about getting a cat, and we thought we'd take her to the cat cafe so we could hang out with some kittens. They are very cute.
You could probably adopt them, right?
They are, yes. This one, I think a lot of the cat cafes in Japan are just like the cats live at the cafe, and that's all there is to it. This is actually part of an animal shelter program. These cats can be adopted. So you can go and sit there at the cafe and, play a board game or something, and one curls up in your lap, and you can say, "Hey, I'd like to take this."
Don't play checkers at a cat meeting.
Yes, and there's you go through an application process like any shelter, but and they have binders of photos around the place of alumni cats that were there for a while and got adopted and are gone. It's very
I just looked
cute.
up the address so that I can go next time I'm in the city.
Yes.
You might get another cat, huh, Brienne?
Yeah, probably not.
No?
But that doesn't mean it wouldn't be fun to sit there for a
It's
little while.
definitely
Where
fun
the
to sit
steak
there for a little while.
tartare?
So there was one of these in Ithaca where I just was. My student host, he was driving me back, and he pointed it out. He said, you can go and hang out. It's a cafe. They have cats, and you can adopt them, too, if you want. I think that's a great idea. Very cool.
This one says they're all rescued and adoptable.
Yep.
They're spayed, neutered, and tested for FIV and FELV and vaccinated.
Yep.
So
I did a TWiV up in Ithaca with Gary Whitaker, who works on feline coronavirus, okay? And probably all these cats have feline coronavirus. There's nothing you can do about it. Most of them will be okay, and so I said, well, what makes them then get a disease like feline infectious peritonitis, right? He says they get stressed. When they get stressed, then the virus apparently starts to reproduce at high levels, and then it causes a very bad disease in cats.
Yeah,
He said basically all shelter cats are infected, and probably even the ones you get at pet stores. But you can't grow the virus in cells in culture, so it's very hard to study, as you might imagine. So I look forward to that. It was a really cool TWiV. My pick is a video. So the WEHI, the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute in Melbourne has, it's a research institute, and they have a visualization department, and they make video. I subscribe to their YouTube channel because they put out cool videos, and this one is called Virus by times 1 million. And I'm going to play it, but I don't want the sound on here. Okay. So it's just a series of different virus models. And what they do is a molecular simulation, so they're vibrating as in solution. Small molecules vibrate; they're not just sitting there. And so they have multiple viruses. Here's an adenovirus at the beginning, and of course, they say it's COVID-19, but it's not COVID-19. It's SARS-CoV-2. And all the spikes are vibrating. If you're nervous, you might not want to look at this because it's very, very. And we have polio virus. I don't know why they took the RNA out, but they took the RNA. Then we have HIV here with this very sparse glycoproteins. And so they're nice to look at. There's a whole bunch of them, and they're all cool. You got herpes virus. They even, of course, they put monkeypox somewhere in here. You got hepatitis. They have viruses with antibodies. So another adenovirus, rhinovirus. So it's cool.
Nice.
Vincent, do you know I did my sabbatical at WeHi?
Oh,
I think I remember that. Yeah.
I met a lot of interesting people while I was
What did you do there? Did you just have coffee?
I worked on malaria. I worked with David Kemp, who was a converted Drosophila geneticist to malaria. It was fun. I had a lot of fun.
When I visited, so across the street is the what's the name of the
hospital? No,
there's an institute across the street. It's the the Doherty Institute, right?
Doherty,
so Peter Doherty.
That's what Peter Doherty.
MHC fame, right?
Yep.
They made a building named it after him, and he's in there. Right. I went to visit him, and he took me and he showed that's WeHi over there. So across the street.
To show you how old I was when I went to WeHi, Gus Nossel was still the director.
Well, you're pretty old, Dixon.
I am. Proud of it.
I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying,
No. Being pretty old is not the same as being senile.
No. You're old, but you've seen a lot.
Tend to go hand in hand.
But listen, I went to Cornell and I said I graduated in 1974. They're like, none of them were born at the time.
True.
I feel ancient because that's a lot of years ago, right?
That's right. That's right.
It's really a lot. It's like, 50 years ago, right?
Did you recognize your school?
Well, yes, actually. I walked because I had to go to another building, and
it's a gorgeous campus, by the way.
I passed the place where they make ice cream and milk, right?
Yes.
Well, these ag schools have one of those, right? Do you have an ice cream place at Michigan, Kathy? No.
No, that's we don't.
No. And then right next to the ice cream place is so the ice cream place is called Stocking Hall. I love the names of these halls, right? Stocking Hall. And then next to it was a hall where I took a molecular biology course that I absolutely loved. It just turned me on to phage and DNA and all that stuff. And it was at night. It was a night course, very hard to stay awake. But I remember that really. And the professor, he gave you all his notes. And I still have a ring binder full of the notes for this course. And it was a little weird because he sat there and he just read them.
Oh dear.
He sat there was a desk on the stage in the lecture hall and he just read his notes. But
that's sad.
I still found it so compelling. He would stop now and then and interject something, but I don't think he should have read them anyway. So yes, I recognize some buildings. I was trying to find the building where I took genetics with Jerry Fink. And I couldn't find it. But a lot has changed. Like there's all new buildings, as you would imagine. They're building a new building. By the way, Brianne Rayna Plowright, she's going to be there. They're building a new building, and she's going to move to that one, up there and stuff. So, yeah. But there's a lot of stuff that is all new. Downtown is totally different. It's very different. It's not the same place I went to, but that's fine.
No.
That is TWiV 929. The show notes are at microbe.tv/TWiV. You can send your questions, your comments, your picks. We like to get listener picks. Please send some. You can do all of that to TWiV at microbe.tv if you enjoy our work and you'd like to support this incubator. Because right now, we keep the temperature low, but we'd like to turn it up a little.
In the winter, we'd like to turn it.
Actually, it's pretty cold in here, isn't it?
It's actually kind of chilly.
I cannot control the temperature, right? So there's a thermostat. It's one of these thermostats that are for show, I guess. I got it set on 78, and it's 68 degrees.
Yeah, it's about 70 maybe.
And I don't know how to control. Maybe I should talk to the building manager, because it's too cold. But
Doesn't
anyway,
speak well for an incubator.
yes, it's too cold for an incubator. But if you'd like to support our work, you can go to microbe.tv/contribute. And I should mention that, over on Amazon, there's Amazon Smile, right? Smile.amazon.com. And you can pick Microbe TV as your charity. I know this because we just got, Kathy and I just got a notice that, they put some money in the bank for our purchases. So we're there in the list. You can select Microbe TV, and then they send a percentage of what you buy to Microbe TV. That's an easy way to do it, right? Microbe.tv/contribute. Dixon Despommiers at Racaniello.org, thelivingriver.org. Thanks, Dixon. Good to see you.
You're welcome, everybody. It was a great session. I loved Andy Slavitt. I just loved him.
Yeah, I could tell you had a kindredship with him.
No, I hope we all felt that way.
Well, I don't often talk to non-virologists,
He was good. It was a good perspective.
I think it's a different perspective. I thought it would be interesting to hear from someone on the other side, but you clearly have Dixon. That's good. I'm glad you had a nice chat with him. Here at the incubator, Alan Dove came to visit today. He's at alandove.com, Alan Dove on Twitter. Thanks, Alan. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you, too. It's always a pleasure.
Brianne Barker's at Drew University Bioprof Barker on Twitter. Thanks, Brianne.
Thanks. It was great to be here.
Kathy Spindler's at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks. This is a lot of fun.
I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.ws. I'd like to thank the American Society for Virology, the American Society for Microbiology for their support of TWiV, Jolene for the timestamps, and Ronald Jenkins for the music. You've been listening to This Week in Virology. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week. Another TWiV is viral.